So good afternoon, everybody. I've got Jelen here with me from Ubiquity PR and Breathren. And Joel, I'd love for you to just start out with Ubiquity, since I realized that you're recently celebrating 21 years of being there and having that company founded. So I'd love for you to just start with how you got there and what got you started.
So in '95, I tried to do an NCTJ course and I was too old, which to me seemed unfair, but that was the way it was. And I just thought maybe it's a sign that I need to pursue something alternative, but within media. So I looked into the PR industry and I found that it could be more lucrative. Very few journalists make lots of money in the industry. I thought it could be more lucrative, and I liked the connections bit. So I became a connector because it's something I've automatically done through my short career by that time. I'd only been working for about 8 years after university. And I networked my way literally into a position and worked my way up to director level in a couple of years, and then saw what was happening in Liverpool as a city and thought, right, I need to move from my current employer, which then was in Manchester, a company called Precise Communications. I was working amongst some real big hitters in media, some who were broadcasters on regional and national networks, learnt loads, enough for me to gain the confidence to start on my own in 2001.
Amazing. I mean, obviously you have quite a varied background there, but it does seem like it was all leading you towards, like you said, starting a PR company. And I feel like that main inspiration, that foundation, would you say that has been the most impactful? Was there any person within Manchester, within those companies, that actually inspired you to really start it? Anybody who was like, you know what, why don't you just try it? Or was it something that kind of came from within?
I think it was within me. So I was a frustrated health economics graduate. My parents were one of those guardians who wanted me to do something in business. Otherwise, they wouldn't send me to university and pay for it. So I thought, well, fair enough. If you're going to pay for it, I've got to bend a little bit. So I spent 4 glorious years in the Northeast studying health economics. But really what I wanted to do was something like sociology or journalism. And they weren't so keen, particularly on the sociology side of it. So I pursued a more business-oriented degree. And then when I was able to spread my wings and be a bit freer, having got the degree, I thought, right, I'm going to go and pursue what I'm really interested in doing, being observant around people, different cultures, and did some freelance writing, and then just carried that through into PR by working with clients who reflected that client base. I took it from there. So it meant I was working in the arts, in well-being, and spaces where you could really get to know people, as opposed to, say, the harsher world of, say, professional services, which is a little bit more black and white and less creative. That's what really inspired me.
Incredible. And I do see that there is a link there between that PR, Ubiquity PR and Breathren. You said that it was more of the wellness things. You kind of were able to really get to know people. Is that what inspired Breathren? How did that come about?
So it was a mixture of a personal and professional crusade. So there were people in my immediate family who had suffered with mental health on quite a severe level in the 80s, and it left its mark on me. I was lucky I had a different character, different personality to those people within my immediate family. But when you see things close up, it never leaves you. And I was fascinated in helping some people in my immediate family. And as part of that process, I learned about breathing education and its impact on our mood, our physical, our mental, and our psychological health. And I was very fortunate in my networking to come across a chap who was the founding father of chronic hyperventilation syndrome, which turned out to be a diagnosis that mimicked ME, or chronic fatigue syndrome, which at the time was getting heavily diagnosed by doctors, but was being misdiagnosed in many cases at the same time. So anyway, the point is that I'd found a solution to a problem in my family around mental health that actually then made me think about mental health in the workplace. Remember, this is back in the 90s, and
Mm.
employers weren't talking about mental health. They weren't thinking about well-being in the workplace, workshops or strategies for mental health. Roll on 25 plus years, and now it's a huge thing, partly because of the pandemic, but also the progression in employers understanding the needs more of employees.
Absolutely.
They want as fringe benefits far more than just a nice car or some nice office with some leisure space in there. So it's got to the point where the fruition of learning over 25 years, the benefits of understanding yourself, how you work, how your environment can shape you, what you want from your work, how to achieve that, coping strategies for stress, etc., all bound up in breathing education. So I was able to use the knowledge to put together a company in 2016, which I mostly did one-to-work consults with, and then just built it up within the last 9 months to working more with corporates and SMEs, businesses and organizations, helping them understand the power of having a well-being strategy. I've teamed up with other companies who work in the same space, and slowly we're getting more clients, literally week by week.
Incredible. It is such an important movement, and I remember speaking to a woman a couple of weeks ago. She worked in HR as well, and she was taking a very much of a well-being angle on HR. And there's definitely been a huge rise in taking care of employees' mental health. But I thought it was crazy as well how many things that affect us in our daily lives. I did while doing research is affected by breathing. Like you said, chronic fatigue, productivity at work, even regulating asthma and things like that can all be affected by breathing techniques, you say.
It's true. We don't talk loads about breathing education within the workshop sessions because some people, it's too weird. I'm just being honest with some of the feedback we get. So we have to gently approach that subject. And it's much more about looking at well-being ways and about how, for example, your environmental health, your intellectual health, your emotional health, your spiritual health, etc., how that impacts you on a daily basis. When we do the things to do with breathing education, that's to do with specific things like technology, because people generally have no grasp, and why would they, unless they've been educated about it, have no grasp of how we breathe when we use technology. We just kind of do it. It's only when we discuss it in detail that people can relate to it. So, for example, it's not uncommon for people to hold their breath while they are using a PC, a laptop, a Mac, or a phone. Quite common to do that, as opposed to that very gentle breath where you breathe from the lower abdominal muscles, you breathe through your nose only. So it's very common because people are on a heightened sense of anticipation when they're in an office environment or at work generally. What seems to happen, first of all, when that anticipation kicks in, is that people start to mouth breathe, a bit like you're startled when you're watching a horror film, if you watch horror films, a bit like you're startled when you have a surprise. So when you're in that anticipation mode, it's really, really important to maintain the healthiest way to breathe, because otherwise you put yourself in a state of fight or flight, and you create necessary stress in your body, which sends a cascade through your system, a cascade of stress through your system, which makes you more tired, less productive, in a poorer mood. There are so many negative aspects to breathing incorrectly and dysfunctionally whilst at work. So once people have the knowledge, they tell us that they feel far more relaxed, far more productive, far more energized, far less stressed, and are grateful they've got a coping mechanism to live with what sometimes can be a really difficult day or week. You can't go into work, I don't feel, without having a strategy to cope with the potential stress you may face.
I mean, and it's incredible because it's a tool that we have consistently. We don't have to download an app. We don't have to subscribe to something. It's something that anybody can do, and it takes like what, a couple of minutes to kind of regulate your breathing and center yourself. I find that the most fascinating about it. But I mean, amazing. I'd like to go back in terms of the actual business structure and your personal journeys and learnings throughout creating two successful businesses. What have been the biggest learnings for you?
I think the biggest learning has been always to be genuine and true to yourself. So I'm not so sure it's a learning as such, more just an acknowledgement of how important that is. Because when I go out connecting people, which I talked about that I love doing, people want to meet someone who's genuine. They don't want to meet someone who is playing up to a particular position, whether that's seniority in a company or the stereotype of somebody who works in marketing, PR, advertising. They just want to meet someone because, after all, we're all interested in human interest. So when you met your partner, if you have a partner, you were looking for certain aspects in terms of their character. And you were only able to find that out if they were going to be genuine with you. Otherwise, you'd be unsure, uncertain, and probably wouldn't be their partner right now. So we all love to know what makes each other tick. And I love listening to people and learning, finding out what makes them tick. So being myself and meeting other genuine people rather than someone who's been given a role, that's what I love to do. So not so much a lesson, just an acknowledgement of what's really, really important. And also to, having come from a very down-to-earth upbringing, also to keep things real. Remember who you are. Underestimate anybody you meet. And you can learn something from everybody. And that's what I always hope to do.
Absolutely. I mean, fantastic pieces of advice there. Definitely for the young people that we have watching these sorts of interviews. We do like to take a spin on in terms of COVID and things and the pandemic and how you found that it affected your businesses. What were the biggest challenges over the last couple of years?
I suppose the biggest challenge was one that everyone else would say was to do with uncertainty. But maybe reflecting on your last question about lessons. So when you're in an uncertain environment, you have to realize that there's not many things you can control. There are a few things, but where you can't control something, don't try and control it. And sometimes you just have to ride with what's going to go on. I don't mean that you're completely passive. I just mean that sometimes you need to hold your nerve and relax enough and have a bit of faith that things will work out where you are doing your very best. So we organise events at Ubiquity. So, for example, and also with Brethren and workshops for the general public as well as employers and organisations. If you can put your hand on your heart, once you've organised an event and say a few hours before the event happens, that you've done your absolute level best to make it a really big success, there's nothing more you can do. You can't control various factors. And it's the same with the pandemic. So that's how you have to look at these things. Otherwise, you get into a situation of a blame game, sometimes being self-critical. Sometimes you create unnecessary stress and anxiety, again, usually around things you can't control. So I think the need to be measured when things are uncertain is absolutely huge.
Exactly. And I do feel that a lot of people came out of balance and they were being influenced by so many things, you know, the media, the government, everything that their neighbors were saying, everything around them. And within that time of uncertainty, it possibly is very hard to feel like perhaps you're doing enough or you're hitting all of the boxes. But in terms of recovery and things and kind of maintaining that trajectory, do you feel like both your companies have kind of been successful in that regard?
I think relatively so, yes. I mean, one, we're in an advantageous position because Ubiquity was never reliant on one particular sector. So we always had a wide range of diverse sectors, some of which were online based many years ago. We're working with the media. The media is 24/7. The media never closed one day during the pandemic, far from it. there were many companies who were looking to pivot, either in the way they worked or completely different sectors and moving into those. So there were plenty of companies looking for advice of the kind they didn't have, because many companies within the marketing space have got social media knowledge, perhaps because they use it personally. But beyond that, they wouldn't necessarily know how to tackle crisis management, wouldn't necessarily know how to talk with journalists. They wouldn't necessarily know how to handle online collateral. So online events was a big thing for the first time for lots of companies. So it was advantageous there. In terms of breathing education, well, a different kettle of fish completely, but the number of people whose mental health took a turn for the worse, the number of people who were suffering from anxiety, the number of people who needed to learn those coping techniques I talked about in terms of stress became huge. And whilst there was a general lack of awareness around breathing education, so for example, meditation, mindfulness, yoga were far higher up on the well-being spectrum than what I put together with Breathren. But all of a sudden, because the breath and people's breathing suffering through COVID became a thing in news, there was far more understanding of it. The NHS started to socially prescribe people being able to buy into what we were doing, which was a huge help. We were getting referrals from GPs, and slowly that seeped through into the corporate space and the SME space. So we were very fortunate in the way that the issues and symptoms of the pandemic lent to the businesses that I've got.
Absolutely. I mean, that link there is actually quite incredible. In terms of the future of Ubiquity and Breathren, where do you see the companies going? Where would you like to take them in the next 5 years?
So increasing the last 5 years within Ubiquity, we've worked more in the wellbeing space, not exclusively, but almost every client we've had has had a wellbeing angle to what they do. So it might be a property client who are looking, for example, to improve the well-being of students in terms of their living space. So rather than living in cramped city centre flats or living in suburbia in homes that could be upgraded but don't get upgraded, we work for a company called Emperor, who award-winning business, who provide very high standard homes that were former HMOs. And one of the key threads that runs through their business and through the developments they create is to improve the well-being of students in the living space. And it goes on and on. You know, we look at the arts sector, and there's a lot of work being done by our clients in that sector to do with well-being. I could literally run through every different sector we work in. There's a well-being theme to that. So what we plan to do is work with more and more clients who either have a well-being theme as part of their existing business, or they are a well-being practice, and we know we're in a really good position to help them. With regards to Breathren, that's just a case of raising more awareness, producing more collateral in-house, and then pushing that out externally. So for example, we've got some merchandise coming out with some memes to help people understand what this is all about. I've partnered up with a brilliant psychotherapist who's put together a book called 8 Wise Ways, called Kim Rutherford, who I'd love you to meet at some point. And we're going to collaborate together, and we've already got some business opportunities lined up to deliver workshops to lots of different companies within the business district in the city of Liverpool. But we don't think it's going to be restricted to this city, but we're starting here and then moving outwards within the region.
Well, that sounds epic, all of the plans. And I feel like whenever there's a common theme that ties things, I mean, people may say that, you know, PR and then a wellbeing breathwork company, how are they even related? But if you have one long theme that kind of ties into and also impacts your personal life as well, I think that's probably how you have become so successful. In terms of your workshops and everything that you do for the public, I'd love for you to kind of include a little bit more information. Where can people find you? Where can people get access to the services that you offer?
So in terms of workshops with regards to Breathren, simply look at breathren.co.uk. We've not put any workshops up yet just because it's the time of year. So we're waiting till the end of August. We've planned we're doing some in Blackburn House in Liverpool. We've just moved from a space which was 39 Rodney Street, which was the Liverpool Wellbeing Centre. The building was taken back by the owners because of the lease being up. So we'll be working at Blackburn House. We've just put an agreement together with the BIPC, which is owned by the council in Liverpool, and we're going to be doing a wellbeing event in October at Blackburn House. But we'll put that and other workshops we're doing for the general public and business on the Breathren site, breathren.co.uk, in the coming weeks.
Okay, amazing. And I will be sure to include all of the social media links to your websites and social media pages on the description of this interview, so people can find out everything that's going on with you guys.
Thank you.
All right, amazing. Thank you so much for your time today, Joel.
You're welcome, and thank you, Anna. I appreciate it.